Welcome to an all-new episode of the McFuture podcast. I'm Steve Faktor, and today I have an amazing guest, Professor Glenn Loury. He was the very first Black tenured economics professor at Harvard University. And since then, he's gone on to teach at Harvard, Northwestern, Michigan, and now he's the professor of economics at Brown University. And he is one of the most outspoken critics of some of the social justice movements happening today, including Black Lives Matter and all the wokeness. And the reason for that is he spent his entire career focusing on what actually works when it comes to racial equality and social policy. There's not a single untouchable subject we didn't touch, and not in a dirty way. We get into the statues coming down. We talk about the future of these movements and exactly how far they're going to go, when Martin Luther King is going to eventually get canceled. We also talk about corporate-sponsored racism, which is, believe it or not, now a thing. And, of course, affirmative action, which is kind of implicit in a lot of stuff that's happening today. And finally, towards the end, we have this amazing conversation of his personal life and his personal struggles and some of the wisdom that came from that. And I hope you stay tuned for the end because it's really, really great. Anyway, here's my conversation with Professor Glenn Loury. I think you'll enjoy it. I heard a really interesting interview that you did with Reason magazine. And I've read your stuff before, and I've heard you speak, and it seems like you have so much wisdom to offer in this moment. Why is nobody listening?
Oh, that's a big question. We are not really listening to each other, are we, these days? We are in our respective camps. And it amazes me, I'll put out a commentary and people will, the first thing they'll say is, why did you write for that magazine, like Quillette, City Journal, because they're supposed to be right wing. God forbid that I should actually write for the National Review or Epic Times or something like that. And, I'm saying you're judging a book by its cover. What's up with that? Everybody's in their respective camps. I think Trump is I don't want to blame him personally as much as the era of Trump seems to me to have this quality of everyone going to their respective corners and not taking any prisoners. So, now we're in the midst of, that people use the word moral panic. I don't think that's an inaccurate assessment. We're in the midst of a kind of event. And it's all about showing solidarity with them. And, I got to show solidarity.
Have you ever had the feeling personally where you felt obligated to say something or take a position because of how others would judge you? Have you ever felt that during the course of your life or career?
Oh, sure. I imagine everyone has. I certainly have. I tell this story in something I wrote a long time ago about being in a political meeting back in the early 1970s and having a friend who was white. He looked like a white guy, although he was Black, in the sense that he had mixed race parentage, but he could pass for white, kind of thing like that. But he was a very radical guy, very radical left, kind of revolutionary Black guy. But he was white, but he was Black. You see what I'm saying? And he was my friend, And we're at this Black Panther rally, okay? And he tries to speak, and the guys up in front of the room say, "What are we doing with a white man in this? He can't speak in our meeting." But this is my friend, But I didn't speak up for him. I didn't say, "Don't worry, he's okay," because I did not want to be the one Black person in the room standing up for the white guy. And I wanted to keep solidarity with my fellow Blacks. So yeah.
Group protection is really important. And I think what's happened is now that we have these global communities of interest rather than real communities of interdependence and necessity, what ends up happening is you have to essentially find your tribe. Otherwise, you're, sort of an island onto yourself. And I don't know that that's a very comfortable feeling for us as humans. And maybe it's stronger now, as you mentioned, because of Trump, and he's sort of, kind of been the button that pushed everyone into those respective tribes.
I hadn't thought about that. The difference between virtual connection and as it were, real connection, and the ease with which virtual connection can become tribalized. The fact that if I have a neighbor, somebody I'm going to church with, somebody my kids are in school together, whatever it is, whatever they might think about politics, I still have to live on the same street with them or whatever. So we have a way of kind of ratcheting down the extent to which our identity depends upon our particular ideological commitments, and we can get along. We can sort of get a modus vivendi going. But if I'm just connecting up with somebody, he's sitting in his pajamas in Oslo, Norway. I'm sitting in my pajamas in Providence, Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, and we either agree, and so we're patting each other on the back, or we disagree, and so we're going at each other's throats. I think there's a lot to that.
And at the end of the day, you don't need each other, because bonds that are forged based on interest, like let's say you have a neighbor and you like the same types of food, you like to go to concerts together, you have these things. If that neighbor goes away, all right, whatever, you'll find another person to do those things with. But when you had to defend a village, when you had to keep your kids alive, when you had to, have sort of common enemies that would attack you, or, all the things that were survivalistic throughout history, then those bonds are much stronger. Then, you disagree a little bit on politics. I guess, yeah, you could start a war, but you could also overlook it because you need that neighbor to help you patch the roof in your house.
There will be a counter argument, Stephen. I'm sure you can anticipate it. People will say, yeah, the good old days. But you know what? Women were in the kitchen, blacks were second class citizens, gays were in the closet, and all you had was free channels on television. you know.
There are no good old days. Yeah, I don't want to romanticize it. There are things that we've gained that you can't look back and go, oh, that's when we were great, so to speak. I think what happens is that we're failing to retain the good things of the past and think that they're all disposable. And I think it kind of ties to my first question about yourself and your opinions, because when you have people who've accumulated wisdom, a level of success, ideas about the world that were, for lack of a better term, battle worn, you would think that like in the past, we would try to harness that and learn from that. But now, unless you're a cute girl on TikTok, who's gonna share your thoughts or your ideas or your videos?
Yeah, man, I don't know. I go up on YouTube with my stuff, and I might get 10,000, 20,000. I might, if I get lucky, get 30 or 40,000. Every now and then I smash through, I get 100,000. But I don't get 5 million.
Right. And the packaging matters. And this is an era of packaging. And, everyone is super proud of their brand deals and all of the things that are, sort of a monetization of your image and your ideas. And I also think that's, kind of a life of compromise. And everyone is compromised to some degree. I just wonder which compromises we're okay living with. And I think that the people who are these idealists who are taking down statues and evaluating things based things from the past using today's criteria, I think there's a certain purity that is almost childish, or childlike. I don't want to be insulting, but I think to expect someone to have lived by your ideals, or even crazier, that you would have been the hero in that time era. Like everyone else was for slavery, but me, no, I would have been the hero.
Again, I think that's a nice point. I saw a column in the New York Times the other day. I don't know if you saw it, Charles Blow. He was saying, yes, George Washington too. And then he was going on to make a full-throated argument about why all the statues had to come down. And I guess you have to end up renaming the capital of the country because, he was a slave owner. Slavery was terrible. And, and he says, don't tell me about the fact that it was a different time, because there were people living at that time who were against it, et cetera. And I thought, well, yeah, I see what you're upset about, but you know what? I mean, and your point, if you had been alive then, I mean, not alive as a slave, alive as a person born to landed gentry in Virginia with all those acres and all those properties, what would you have done? Would you have been the sole person on your hill or in your village or whatever who was, it's very easy to say, it's very, very easy to say. So there's a lot of sanctimony, there's a lot of self-righteousness, there's a lot of hypocrisy. Martin Luther King Jr., he's a great American. I love him. He's an iconic figure, but he was, if the feminists would have come after him because he was a womanizer, I mean, my goodness, you're going to take his statue down, So no, we're not going to take Martin Luther King Jr.'s statue down. We're going to take George Washington's statue down. So I don't know. But it's a fool's errand to argue this issue with people.
Yeah, yeah, especially when the arguments are coming from an emotional place and not an empirical one. I started going down this path before the pandemic. My thesis is that we are moving towards religion and much faster than we ever thought, and not traditional faith, not Christianity or Judaism or Islam or anything like that. We're moving towards these other things that have taken the place of faith. So it's intersectionality, or in some cases it's, yoga or meditation, and each one provides a different aspect of what a belief system used to provide. And now that those have fractured, people are still, they're still innately tribal, and they still want to believe. Some do, believe in the singularity, that they can upload their consciousness into the cloud. So every person has found a thing, and it starts to take on those religious qualities, and politics is one of those things. And so I did a live event with Pastor A.R. Bernard, and I talked about this bridge between, what can a traditional faith offer to people who are seeking a reason to believe, but just can't buy into the old stories. And so they need new stories to believe in. And I think that wokeism, Black Lives Matter, gives them the kind of purpose that belief in God once did.
It is what you're describing, the classic conservatives' lament. And I mean conservative in the Roger Scruton, the philosopher, the British philosopher just died, or in the Edmund Burke, kind of, why would I hold on to the practices of my forebears, my ancestors, my prayers and my rituals and my, because my reason tells me that it's wrong, and I'm smart. I'm in the Enlightenment. I got science. I know that I don't believe in magic. You say somebody rose from the dead. Come on. So my reason tells me that it's hocus pocus. Why would I keep believing in it? To which the answer is, these are the templates laid down by our forebears over many, many generations, rough-hewn, but they're serviceable, and they give us a kind of structure and a meaning in life. Compare that to invention, to making up each generation a whole new set of rules, to going with the flow, to letting my spontaneous feelings, and end up engendering whatever, doesn't have structure, doesn't have coherence, it doesn't have, quote, meaning, close quote. Meaning doesn't fall from the sky. Meaning we basically inherit with our language, with our practice, and with our customs, and with our narratives, and with our myths. So that would be the way that the conservative argument might go. To which the liberationists are going to say, yeah, but women were in the kitchen, gays were in the closet, blah, blah, blah. They're going to talk to you about transgender people. They're going to start telling you it's a new day. And they're going to talk about liberation, about being free from these encumbrances. To which my answer, because I'm a conservative at this level, my answer is, free to do what? Free to wander in the wilderness? Free to be a hedonist? Free to gorge yourself with one or another phony, thin, insubstantial stimuli that it's like masturbation. There's nothing there at the end. You know what I'm saying? Free to do what? When I hear the old hymns, I am no longer a practicing religious person, but I brought up in the Black American Christian tradition. When I hear the hymns, when I hear the rhythm of the preacher in the sermon, when I see the congregation gather, I talk now just about this little corner of religion. I'm not proselytizing. I'm not trying to get anybody to believe anything. I'm just saying that music, that structure, that prayer group, that camaraderie, that sense of faith, that Bible. I'm not reading it literally. I don't think it's the encyclopedia of life, but I'm clinging to the practices of my ancestors. This is the conservative argument, and I think there's a lot to it.
Like I always thought I was a socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Now I don't know what I am because the liberal side has moved so far left. I'm practically far right at this point because I can't even see them anymore. Is there room for a return of those arguments? Because I think that these new arguments of victimization offer a form of absolution, to stick with the religious theme, right? So when this woman, who I think is a grievance grifter, D'Angelo, comes to your company and says, hey, all you have to do is, ask for forgiveness because you're internally always guilty of being, a racist, and therefore you have to, always be apologizing. Anyway, so he needs an acronym. But the idea is that this argument, when she walks in, she's basically giving a sort of absolution. Hey, company, listen, I know you've sinned, but I am here. If you take these books and hire me and my friends here, we will give you absolution from the racism that we know you've harbored.
Let me say this, Steve, because I'm an economist. I'm a professor of economics. And we usually at the university are close to the business school. If the university has a business school, then the economics department is the business school. They'll be in league together, And I've never really understood the hustle, which is these books and these fads and these consultancies that run around making $1 gazillion telling corporations how to feel. They all got the hocus pocus, how to be a great salesman, how to change the culture, I'm not but I never really believed in any of it. I always thought it was like, the fad of the week. And this is in the human relations area, it seems to me, in corporate America, the fad of the week. We're talking about Robin DiAngelo. You're talking about white fragility. Yeah. I'm sure she's made $1 gazillion. She's sold 100 million books. And I don't get it, man. You're smart enough to invent a product, to develop a supply chain globally, to organize 100,000 people working in your organization, to make a profit, and yet you buy this garbage? I don't, what? And you know why? Because the HR department doesn't have a bottom line.
Even jobs themselves don't have a bottom line. So I've written about this before. The work itself for a lot of people is esoteric. Very few people are salespeople or, call center operators where you can measure their throughput. A lot of people are middleware in these giant corporations. So when you get rid of the ability to measure people, then you can let people like this in. And how do you even know they had an impact?
You're going to do a climate survey. You're going to send around a questionnaire to the 10,000 people who work in your organization and ask them how they feel. And she will have made them feel a little bit better or a little bit worse. But at this point, because, like I say, I'm an economist and we worry about agency. We worry about how you design contracts to motivate people. And if you can't see output, you can't control input. If right. You cannot see the output, you cannot jigger the incentive so as to induce the input. Because what do so, but like I say, I think it's about keeping the peace. It's about covering ass. It's about avoiding employee revolt. It's about not having Al Sharpton picketing outside of your company.
I feel like this Robin DiAngelo lady has honed in on Al Sharpton's game. I think she's doing it better.
Yeah, she's doing it way better.
Yeah. If you had to guess, what percentage of the books that were purchased were actually read?
I have no idea, but it's a good point. Less than half for sure. Maybe you read 20 pages and you couldn't take any more. The journalist Matt Taibbi.
Yeah, he's great.
He has a review of this book. He says it's the worst book that was ever written.
Poor guy. He's probably the first white guy to actually read it. A lot of them own it. They just don't read it. And, maybe I'm just a hater because my book didn't sell as much. But, yes, I am. I'm jealous that I could have written this hocus pocus, this feel bad hocus pocus, and made hundreds of millions in sales.
So tell me something. What did I say that made you think I was such a wise person?
I think it's so rare to find people who are credible, incredibly successful, economists by trade of the correct race for the moment and completely ignored. So I think it was more the reality of you than any one particular thing that you said. I wanted to explore this with you because I have a few thoughts when, someone is coming in from this new woke perspective. I think a lot of what they're basing things on, and you mentioned this, is a series of anecdotes. And there's certainly a lot of very powerful anecdotes out there in terms of videos of police brutality, in terms of, certainly, criminal behavior by cops, all these things that could enrage a person. And what's happening is no one is saying, hey, let's see the totality. Let's look at the statistic. Let's look at the data. Basically, we go from the anecdotes to the reaction. Because I see policies changing, I see statutes coming down, I see corporate hiring practices, all kinds of promises being made, people quitting jobs, shows getting banned. So we've got a full-on moral panic happening. I don't know if this is a long-term or short-term thing, but my question is, how far can it go? Because I've seen it go. My family escaped from the Soviet Union. I'm an immigrant. I'm speaking to you my second language, so I know what it's like to kind of start from nothing. And so to me, it's very scary to find the same kind of tactics and beliefs that I thought we escaped coming back here to haunt me once again. So my question is, I've seen it happen where it takes over a nation. My question to you is, do you feel like it stops at some point to take a pause and look at the actual data and act on that data rather than on the emotion?
I think it could go very far. I think you have a lot of historical precedents. You have McCarthyism. You have the Cultural Revolution in China. You have prohibition. I'm talking about moral panics in American history.
Yeah.
You have this child molestation thing that broke out where they were, convicting people and destroying lives of people based on kids' kind of coerced testimony about sexual abuse. There's no boundary. I don't see any constraint. There is. I don't. First of all, stay calm, Glenn. I tell myself, stay calm. This is not yet the French Revolution. People's heads are not being cut off. Okay, but there is hysteria afoot, it seems to me, and it's fed by a lot of different things. That's why I mentioned Trump. He's only one of the things, but we're at a time institutions don't have the same confidence that they used to have, the same trust in everything. There are all these different factions. There are all this different splintering. So the virtue signaling that goes on, the shaming that goes on, the canceling that goes on, the Me Too thing, and you can't speak against it because there's this meta, there's the argument about, women's rights in the Me Too, or about racism in the black. There's that argument, but then there's the argument about who's a virtuous person, who's on the right side of history, which turns on what you say down in the other argument, So now, people are slapping each other on the back or slapping each other across the face, depending on whether they agree or disagree about the stuff that's going to be righteous. And this is just me. I could be wrong, but I think it's so superficial. I don't think it's real morality at all. I mean, these problems are actually hard. So crime and punishment and whatnot in the cities and policing and all that, it's a really, 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 really hard problem. It's got multiple sides to it. So you got the cops, but you also got the criminals. Nobody ever even talks about the criminals. You got crime and you got race, you got racist cops, but you also got overly representation of blacks amongst the people who are dangerous in the society. If I'm on the street at a certain time of day or night and I see some kids and they look a certain way and I'm afraid of them, I'm not crazy to be afraid of these kids. And if race is a part of that, it's only a part of that because, in fact, race is a part of it. Okay. Now, there are reasons for that. We could go into what the right social policy should be, how much welfare, how many nurses should be coming home helping families, how many job programs should they be. I'm not a cold, hard-hearted person, but we have to stay in touch with reality, you know. And this defunding the police and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's a frenzied, kind of wild-eyed kind of, and the revolutionaries are feeling very, very self-righteous. They're feeling very, very much, 400 years they collapse. I'm talking about the anti-racists now, and they talk about 400 years. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to be saying, as if the industrial capitalist society of 21st century America and the few scattered pilgrims that were scattered along the eastern seaboard, trying to grow some sorghum or some corn or whatever with some forced labor, were somehow the continuum of a single dimensional evolutionary process. It's so idiotic. So they are a mob. Again, it's exaggerated language. They are a mob. Mobs are in the street. They gather in front of courthouses, demanding that people, I talk now about police officers charged with some crime, be prosecuted, not realizing that most of the crime in the country is being committed by people coming from their community. How would they like it if white victims were gathering in front of courthouses demanding that a black who was a home invader in some subdivision be strung up by his thumbs? They would call it a racist lynch mob because it would be a racist lynch mob. Well, the black and white mobs demanding that police officers be dragged out and strung up by their thumbs are, dare I say it, a racist lynch mob.
Yeah,
I don't want to live in a country run by lynch mobs. I don't want to live in a country where elected prosecutors feel like they have to charge police officers on bullshit crimes the day after without any investigation in order to placate a mob, where the mob is threatening, I'm going to burn down your city if you don't charge these people. Do they know that they're playing with fire? With as many Second Amendment people as there are in this country, with as many weapons as there are in their country, do they not know that they are playing with fire?
Yeah. It seems like, a lot of people don't realize that there are really at least 2 and possibly 4 movements happening at the same time. Because there is an equality movement, and I'd like to believe that I'm part of it and you're part of it. I don't think anyone who is a reasonable, evolved person would like to see anybody discriminated against based on the color of their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, whatever else. So I think there's, that's where a lot of people lie. And a lot of those good people, I think, are being led or misled by people who have very different motives, people who have, kind of a reverse racism type of motive, where they're looking to basically get even or tip the scales in the other direction, not towards equality, but way past equality towards various types of reparations, whatever they may be. Whether it's some stupid, cartoon character that a white person can't voice, which, I don't know how that changes society, and some other cosmetic things. But at the very least, I think there's an equality and a subordination movement happening at once. But I also think there's this sort of Marxist kind of undertone as well, where they are using tactics to get political change that go far beyond racial lines and racial divides and beyond cops and all that. So that's the part that scares me, and it's more insidious, and I feel like it's being transported inside of a Trojan horse that is almost unassailable for political reasons.
You are going to be accused of being a conspiracy theorist, Steve.
I know. There's a lot of, a lot of people have said a lot of things that would lead you to believe that. And the question is, how much of it is conspiracy or maybe fear?
Let me say this. I think it's more Michel Foucault than it is Karl Marx, by which I mean, I think it's more postmodern relativism than it is actually, socialism. I mean, there is a socialist wing. I think a lot of it is about, I don't like liberalism. I mean, a lot of it is I don't like markets. I don't like property. That'll be have a Marxist tinge to it.
Hmm.
But I think it's a deep thing, and I'm not going to claim that I understand it. Really, you need a kind of big think cultural historian to put their heads around it. But it's for example, we're post truth. You know,
Hmm.
there's no way to actually have an effective argument about climate change.
Right.
Forget about it. As you know, because I did a little research on you, man, there's no way to have an argument about COVID-19. You know,
You know, it's
if
funny.
I say, and I have said it, and a ton of freaks have followed me, if I say, my God, we're making monumental decisions here, and we have no idea about the relative costs and benefits, and we're being stampeded, and people are making all kind of claims standing on science, and you got to give me a break. I am a social scientist, okay? I'm a fellow of the Econometric Society. I know my statistics, I know what I'm talking about. You claiming you know this? You don't know this. You don't know this, okay? And you try to say that, I try to say, how much are we prepared to spend? Not an infinite number of dollars per life. We're not prepared to do that. The speed
Right.
limit on the highway is not 20 miles an hour. It could be. Our buildings are so tall, they don't have to be, et cetera, et cetera. We could roll back industrial civilization and there would be a lot fewer deaths from everything, but there also wouldn't be modern medicine.
Right.
There also wouldn't be hundreds of millions of people eating every day in India and China who weren't eating 50 years ago. There wouldn't be this computer in my pocket that I can hold in my hand. There wouldn't be global supply chains that allow me to live more comfortably than my great grandparents could have wildly imagined. Okay, so if I try to say things have alternative costs, there's no free lunch, people go ballistic because they're lying up behind their religious thing. Anyway, I ramble. I'm rambling. We're in a post-truth era. Is my point. It's not just Marxism. That was my point. It's
Right.
not just
Right.
that I want to take money from the rich, that I don't like the fact that there's profit. It's also that I don't believe in God. It's that I don't. Everything is relative. You have your truth. I have mine. You know, you'll never see the world the way I do. There's no way that we can, we got a politics that's based on factionalism. They're representing facts. They're representing blacks. They're not representing people. They're representing these abstract entities. It can be dehumanizing. It can be really, really, really awful, I think. So I
Yeah.
think we're in cultural trouble across the board, not just in terms of economics.
I thought when I was a kid, that, like I'd have friends of all races, all kinds of friends. I grew up in a, immigrant area that was, kind of lower middle class, like trending towards lower class period. And, and I went to a very mixed school. So to me, it's almost such a regression to put all of these intersectional ideas into people's heads, because now I'm falling into that ridiculous way of thinking. Now I'm thinking, oh, well, this is a white middle-aged man, or this is a cis white. Why would I prejudge you based on your, what are they called, immutable characteristic, before I hear what you have to say? And what bothers me most is kind of the thing that you alluded might be a conspiracy theory, is it's being used to discount people and marginalize their ideas wholesale. So there are a lot of people who have a lot of bad ideas. They're even bad people, but sometimes they have good ideas. We have crafted a situation now where you can discount an entire person and marginalize them and get them deplatformed and never have to hear the one or two good things that they may have to offer society. And I think that's a very dangerous place, and it's very contrary to the way I thought we would evolve as sort of a post-racial society.
Yeah, I can't add much to that. I agree with that, actually.
But now that we are sort of slicing and dicing everyone into their sort of victimhood camps and all of their groupings and so on, the thing that comes up, and it hasn't been specifically talked about, but I feel like it's kind of, implicit in the reparations conversation, which is affirmative action, which I'm sure, over the years you've addressed in a multitude of ways. And I'll give you my thought, because I have sort of three contradictory thoughts, and I'm hoping you, as now my appointed psychiatrist, can help me work through this issue. Because on one hand, it seems like, choosing people by race is so arbitrary and reductive that it's very backwards. So that's my first reaction. My second reaction is something I mentioned earlier, which is a lot of jobs are so esoteric now, it almost doesn't matter what criteria you use to pick somebody, because once you put a job into this corporate sort of, box, how your ability to be great at it is limited to begin with. So therefore, if you choose some other criteria besides just merit, then I don't think you're going to lose out much. So maybe we can sustain more people being chosen for criteria other than job qualifications. And my third thought and final one is that I maybe am clinging to a concept of meritocracy that never quite existed. So I'm open to the possibility that I'm seeing merit in a way that is biased. So maybe, because to me, it's always like, hey, who's the best person? I had an all-Indian team. I hired a lot of women. I hired all kinds of people. And they were, to me at the time, the best person for that job. But maybe I don't have a good concept of merit, but I don't know that the people who are pushing alternatives do either. Help me work this out, Professor.
Okay, well, you noted that I will have had the occasion to address the issue of affirmative action once or twice in my career. Fact is,
Yeah.
I've been talking about affirmative action since day one, and day one was 1976. That's when I took my PhD in economics from MIT. That was 44 years ago, and affirmative action has been a subject very much in the air. And as an economist, I've published papers. I've written technical papers about affirmative action, scientific papers where I write down mathematical models or try to think about the incentives and the implications. So I'm not going to talk about that, of course. But I will say this. I mean, you mentioned a number of things. You say, why would we choose by race? And so the value of diversity is the answer. They're going to say the organization is stronger when it's diverse, when it's composed of people who look like the society. And there's an elaborate industry of the defense of that proposition. And it's certainly arguable in certain instances. So if I have a police force policing a city, I probably want some Black and Latino on the police force. I mean, they're rousting guys standing out in front of the bodega with the 40-ounce drinks, and the fights are breaking out, and people have weapons and they're drugs, and they have to arrest people. Come on, you don't want a lily white police force, police in an American city. You want to have some diversity. If I hire the police officers by some exam, and if the Black and Latino don't pass the exam frequently enough, I'm probably going to bend, because the exam is not a Rosetta Stone. It's not defining who can be a police officer. I'm going to reorganize the organization and make it culturally more accommodating to the Black and the Latino officers that I need to bring in. I'm going to flatten it. I'm going to compromise. I'm going to cut some corners. It's not going to kill me. And I'm going to end up with a peaceful city instead of and there's a lot of stuff that's like that. There's a lot of stuff that's like that. I don't know if I'm writing code in Silicon Valley, if it's going to be the same argument. I don't know. If I'm giving people tenure in an electrical engineering program at Carnegie Mellon, it might not be the first thing on my list. If I'm trading bonds and I got people at these terminals trying to figure out where the arbitrage is, and everything's going like this, and like this, and like this, and you better get it right because there's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, I might want to go with the guys that actually can make the money, and the women, if there's some women, but all I care about is who can make the money. Okay? So there'll be different venues where there will be different. So I think that's one point. But I wouldn't be like fall on my sword. You have to not pay attention to race, because there will be plenty of situations where, as a practical matter, you really can't run the organization well. Now, then the question becomes the degree. It becomes, how much do I? And then that's a quantitative, empirical question. It'll vary from organization to organization. So there's that. But I think, there's a danger, and the danger is you get this belief that if I have any racial disparity, I have to remedy it. Otherwise, I'm conceding to racism. And so you get, I don't know, Bronx High School of Science, Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant. These are the schools in New York City. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. These
Yeah,
are the
yeah. No, I grew up in New York.
Oh, you grew up in New York. Okay, so you know, so there's the high school scholastic aptitude test that they give to get the kids into this thing. So these schools are these specialized schools where the kids are all on the 99th percentile and they're super smart kids. And you take a physics or a calculus class at that high school and you're ready to start the second year of when you get to SUNY Stony Brook or wherever you're going in your thermodynamics or whatever, because this, and they're reading Shakespeare and they're etc. um, and you don't get an equal racial representation, and there are too few blacks. So the New York Times runs a front page story. They admitted 1,200 kids at Stuyvesant. Only 7 of them were black. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! And my response to that is, yes, oh my God, how come the black kids can't cut it? That's my
So
response.
that's
Please just give me a minute. Okay,
yeah.
just a second. Because the other response, the institution is racist, let's get some more black kids in there, fails to address the fact that the black kids aren't cutting it. You attack the exam, you say it's closet racism, when in the fact of the matter is that out there in the right tail of the kids who are doing calculus when they're 14 years old, there's not enough black kids who are cutting it. For whatever the reasons, we could go into the reasons. But if we don't address that, if we do an affirmative action Band-Aid over that, okay, and we blame the white people of the system or Mayor de Blasio or whatever, we're not doing justice. That's phony. That's not real justice. Thank you for letting me finish.
No, no, it was great. I've had this thought before, and I kind of framed it slightly differently than you did, but I think we ended up in the same place, which is I feel like we're asking corporations and universities and some other institutions to fix downstream some of the problems that happened upstream. And I think that when you do that, you're actually hurting the group that you're trying to help oftentimes more than you're helping, because you're never getting to the root cause, which is something happened in terms of maybe education, maybe equity in schooling, maybe home life, maybe other issues, and now you get to applicant pools that are unequal, but no one wants to look at the applicant pools and ask that hard question. What they want to do is look at the final snapshot of what your corporate board looks like, of what your population of whoever students looks like, and say, hey, based on this snapshot, clearly there's not been fairness here, and there is very little effort being applied to evaluating what that population of applicants was and what happened along that chain. And because I feel like people will not like what they find and will not be equipped to deal with it, or will not want to deal with it, because those are very hard problems.
I agree with you about that. I think that's exactly right. Let me ask you something. Suppose someone said, okay, Steve Faktor, I hear you. I hear you, Glenn Loury. We're not dealing with the real problems. But all you guys can do is criticize. Now, if you were saying to me that, no, we're not going to do affirmative action, but we're going to do intensive investment in early childhood education, but we're going to do extra summer programs for the talented kids who are not quite up to snuff, but etc. But we're going to really, really engage with the population. We're not just putting them down. We're not just shutting them out. We're not just turning our backs on them. We're not just finding them inadequate. We're not blaming them. We're not judging them. But we're not going to admit them to the program unless they can actually do the work. So let's get busy helping them do the work. Too many conservatives, I think this is actually correct, are content to merely say, you guys are, incompetent, or you're not dealing with reality, or you're dodging the problem, or as you put it, the problem is upstream and we're downstream here. Too many conservatives are content simply to say that and let the chips fall where they may. And, I'm okay, Jack, F you. And really, if you want to be heard, you need to come with a kind of comprehensive view.
Yeah.
And I think that's an argument that's worth considering.
Yeah, I think the things you mentioned. So I think, apprenticeship programs. I think mentoring. I think, investment in small business and education and business. Like, so I volunteered for years at a program called Junior Achievement, where business professionals go into schools and they teach, interview skills, finance, how to, everything, how to run a company. And I did a variety of all those things, probably over 12 to 15 years. And for me, I worked mostly, it was Black, Hispanic students, some white kids sprinkled in. And to me, and went on to mentor some of those kids as well. And to me, the potential is there, but I also see a lot of kids who are tuned out and who aren't even participating. So you had like the ones that are going to make it. They're hustling, they're smart, they're doing the work, and you had a few that are not going to end up in good places. Two or three who are always distracting the class. But there is a big fat middle that are waiting to be somehow turned on to something, to an idea, to a passion, to something, and it was impossible to reach them. They just sat there quietly, but you could not extract anything of any participation or passion from them, and it was challenging for me because there was always for me at least. Even if I wasn't interested in the subject, I had that competitive thing in me where at least I wanted to do well to please the teacher or to beat the other guy or whatever it is. But I wonder what that is, because I don't know that mentoring programs necessarily do that. And I don't know how much you can overcompensate for troubled homes, for example, or a parent who maybe has trouble, because they have to work and can't pay as much attention to a kid as a two-parent household can.
No, I think that is a very fertile area to look. There's no magic bullet. I think there are some initiatives, you put your finger on something, which is, so the development of the young person occurs in the social context, including the home. And so the parents' resources in terms of their education, their emotional resources, their financial resources, how much time do they have? Are they working 2 or 3 jobs? They got multiple kids, the chaos in their lives and whatnot. And they need help. They need, respectful help. I mean, not somebody that treats them like their children, but somebody. So if a nurse comes home with a single mom, she's 19 years old, she's got an infant, she might be a GED. She might not have a whole lot of work experience. There might be a boyfriend in and out of her life. I don't know what, and the nurse says, this is what your child needs for nutrition. This is about the cognitive development. I want you to take good care of your health. Maybe the boyfriend coming over with a key to the apartment isn't the best idea. Whatever they're saying, that might go a long way. Or early childhood education program for the kid. Maybe the kid isn't getting read to, Dr. Seuss or whatever for 2 hours every night by the mother because she ain't reading Dr. Seuss for 2 hours, and not everybody's going to do that. But the kid needs cognitive stimulation. The kid needs social interaction, socialization. Figuring out ways to help, or vocational stuff. 16-year-old, 18-year-old guy, maybe he's a high school dropout, maybe he's got a GED. You could send him to a community college and tell him that he's going to get a BA one day. But the truth is, he's reading at an 8th grade level, and whatever. But he might be able to become a mechanic. He might be able to learn how to, operate a certain kind of, process in a factory. He might be able to get a skill that would allow him to be employable at a more than minimum wage level and take 18-month certificate program at a community college somewhere. I'm making this up, but I'm saying that kind of granular mentorship. Somebody coming out of an AA program, somebody coming out of 18 months upstate, they're 21 years old. The question is, are they going to go straight, or are they going to go back to the hood and hang on the corner? They got somebody like in the Alcoholics Anonymous world, which I know a little something about from earlier in my life. You got a sponsor, you got somebody you can go to and say, man, I want to go hang out and smoke blunts with these brothers and, whatever, but I know they're getting ready to rob the thing on the corner, and I can't be, and the sponsor says, no, this is what you need to do. You need to be still. You need to find the thing that health, the wholesome thing, the, support, help. There's nothing wrong with social policy oriented toward helping people get up and stand on their feet. You want to teach them how to fish. You don't want to make them dependent, but you want to teach them how to fish.
Right. And I'm worried that much of our discourse now is what aren't you, the system, or you, the whoever it is, doing for me. And there's not very much talk about what your role in this is. Because from my experience in life, no one can pull you 100% of the way towards success. It's impossible. And so you have to meet at least 50% of the way. And I don't think anyone seriously discusses a 50%. Maybe entrepreneurial people do. You know, I heard Damon John on a podcast recently, you know, people like that. But I feel like it's drowned out in these sort of intellectual scream fests, or pseudo intellectual, as you might have it. And it worries me, because I feel like your contribution, or the mandate for you to contribute, doesn't go away even if someone else is helping, even if there's a program.
Well, as a veteran of alcohol and drug recovery, I can tell you that's the first, I mean, 30 years ago, but still, I can tell you that that's the first thing you learn. The first thing you learn is that there's no solution to this problem except through you. You got to take responsibility. I admitted that I was an alcoholic and that my life had become unmanageable. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. And I determined to set on a program. I'm the one who's deciding it. Keep the focus on you. Okay. It's so easy to decide that the world is the source of your problem. But you know what? However you got into the hole, you're the only one who's going to climb out of it. This kind of thing. And, it's people will get angry because they'll say poor people, they never had a chance. The structures, this is all putting the onus on, quote unquote, the victim. But, if I step off the curb and a bus hits me, the bus driver should not have been texting. Okay. I have definitely been done an injustice. Okay. That was wrong. That was freaking wrong. But if I don't go to physical therapy, I'm never going to walk again. Do I want to walk or don't I?
So before we go, I really was curious about this. You mentioned it here, and you also alluded to it in the other conversation I saw with you. You have had a history and some struggles, and a recovery, and I wanted to just understand a little bit of what happened, and then how you went about changing, and how did you get out of it? I understand. I want to understand, what were you in, and how did you get out, and what was that process like? Because I feel like there's something that's missing from my knowledge of Glenn Loury that I'd like to know.
Well, basically, in the 80s, I was very young. I was in my 30s, and I was high flying. I was a professor at Harvard, and I had a national reputation as a Black conservative, saying the kind of stuff I'm saying now, but it was in the 1980s, and it was a very shocking thing to see somebody saying it. And I was close to many people in the Reagan administration. I was flying high, Black conservative. And then I had a scandal. I got into an extramarital affair with a young woman. She accused me of assaulting her. I didn't do it, but she accused me. It was complicated. Became public. Charges were dropped later, but it didn't matter. Then I fell into a depression. I started using cocaine and marijuana very heavily and out of control. I was out there on the streets of Boston at 2:00 in the morning. I got caught, with illegal drugs. And I had a case, et cetera. Okay. So this is the kind of classic disaster, right? Guy rising
The
on his
downward
fast
spiral.
career, and then he kind of thing out. So a couple things happened. I found Jesus and I found AA. I'm just going to be straight up. I'm not going to make it pretty, okay? I dragged myself into a Black Pentecostal church, and they put their arms around me and they said, come on, one step at a time. Jesus has not forgotten you. Now, I'm not trying to proselytize to anybody, and I'm not an especially religious person today, but in 1987, they saved my life. Those people loved me and they nurtured me and they saved my life, and they allowed me one day at a time, whatever. And AA is a complicated thing. I stayed in the halfway house for a while, whatever, but I basically had to stop using cocaine. I had a problem and I had to stop using cocaine. And it took me a year and a half. I got myself back on track. And I got myself back on track and I was able to reestablish my career. I decided to leave Harvard. They didn't fire me. I left, but I kind of felt like I needed to leave because it had been so embarrassing. Start over. Boston University, now I'm at Brown. Those are the two places I've taught for the last 25 years. But that's the kind of in the world until I ran into a brick wall. And then I realized I wasn't nearly as smart as I thought I was. There was a whole lot of stuff I didn't know, including about myself. And I just needed to be still for a while and whatever, put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. My wife at that time, she's deceased now. Her name is Linda Loury. She died 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago now. Um, but, she stuck by me through the whole thing. We rebuilt our lives. We started a family, two sons, Glenn Jr., Glenn II, and Nehemiah, who are now, in their 30s. Glenn will be 32 on his next birthday, Nehemiah 29. And, my life got back on track, and I, put one foot in front of the other and haven't looked back. And, knock on wood, or God willing, we're going to stay on the path.
I feel like that story certainly makes you much more not only relatable, but also human to people who for whom it's very easy to stereotype. Black conservative, clearly going to tune this out. but I feel like that, not that you did it for great context, because clearly it was a very destructive path, and luckily you were able to save yourself or have others be able to help you. The question is, how much has that informed what you do, how you see the world, how you interact with people, how you approach your students?
Well, these are very far-ranging questions. I mean, so I'm going to try to pare your question down a little bit.
Sure.
And just answer one aspect of it. In 1988, for between May 1st and Thanksgiving, so that's about 6 months, I lived in a halfway house in South Boston on Mount Ida Road, above the Fields Corner MTA station in Boston. I lived with guys, it was all guys, who had been sleeping in boxes in the Andrew Metro station, who had just gotten out of prison where they had served 7 years for homicide, who were speedballers who shoot up with heroin and cocaine in the same syringe in order to get the high and the low at the same time. I lived with these guys. Okay, I was a professor at Harvard University, and I lived with these guys. Some of them were white, some of them were black, some of them were Catholic, some of them were evangelicals, and some of them were atheists. Some of them were gay, some of them were in the closet. It was a lot of different things, and all of them had to stop drinking. Okay, and by that I mean had to stop doing whatever they were doing that was wrecking their lives. It was run by this tyrannical guy called Bob Brown. He was like 6'3", he weighed 350 pounds. He was a former Boston cop. He was an Irish Catholic guy who converted to fundamentalist Bible-thumping Protestantism while he was in prison because he got caught up in he was a drunk and he got caught up in some scandal. He spent a few years in prison and became a born-again Christian, even though he's born an Irish Catholic guy. Anyway, long story short is, man, some of the best people I will ever meet in life I met in that halfway house. Some of the most poignant stories, some of the most heroic transformation, some of the most tragic catastrophes of people crashing and burning, I learned in that halfway house. And it taught me a couple of things. And one of them is, this race thing, it only goes skin deep. Down underneath, people are struggling with life. Everybody is struggling with the same dilemma of the human condition. We really got to keep it in perspective. We have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. I mean, the idea, because I'm Black and I work on racial inequality, I think about this a lot, but the point I'm making is much more general. It's a point about we are not any particular thing. We're not our ancestry. We're not what our fathers believed. We're not the color of our skin. We're not what continent our ancestors came from. We're open-ended. We have free will. We can make our lives. And everybody is confronted with exactly the same existential challenge, how to make the best out of your life. Everybody faces that challenge, regardless of what their background is. So, I think it's going to sound phony, man, but Martin Luther King, the colorblind ideal, can we all get along? One day my kid, this is really the right idea. We're not there yet, but it's the right idea. And if we allow the the anti-racist woke to dissuade us from the truth of that idea. What is the truth? The truth is that I'm a hillbilly in the mountains of West Virginia or Eastern Kentucky or whatever. I'm a biker out there in one of these dusty towns in South Dakota, or skinhead in one of these things. I'm a meth addict or something. Man, I'm not any worse, better, or different than, you know, a crackhead or a gangbanger in the inner city or somebody who's trying to join the Crips of the Bloods or whatever. And we really, you know, need to, I think, anyway, this is the lesson that I have learned. And I believe it's going to be the only solution for the country going forward. If we really want to say Black Lives Matter, if we want to say everybody is important. I mean, you know, we got to get beyond the racial thing.
That is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much. I'm going to send you all the links when I'll take out all the places where I embarrass myself, like mispronouncing your name. But
no way for you to know. There was no way for you to know.
No, there's no way. No, except all the hundreds of videos that you've posted out there. There's no way I could have known. Keep doing what you're doing. I hope more people hear your voice.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Good to talk to you. Take care now.
Likewise. A pleasure. All right, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to subscribe here, sign up for the Patreon, and also click on the professor's links and check out all of his writing, his podcast, and all the other stuff he's up to. I'm Steve Faktor. See you next week on the McFuture. Sorry for the interruption, but I realized I brought up Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, and didn't really provide a lot of context. In case you don't know, she is what I think is one of the worst race grifters. A grifter is someone who's just an opportunist who will sell you anything or take advantage of an opportunity, even if it's someone's suffering. She sells racism to corporations, basically. And the concept is, white people are always guilty, whether they express their guilt or not. They're always walking around racist. And the only way to cure them is to hire her to train them. And what does she train them in? She trains them into some of the most insane types of interactions you would ever have. She turns every interaction between people of different races or genders or whatever into a little mini race war. And it is the most un-American thing I can imagine for two reasons. First, I was always taught that you're innocent until proven guilty. Her philosophy is white guilt forever. Forever. That's it. You are guilty no matter what. And it is insanity. The second thing is what Martin Luther King taught us, which is don't judge a person by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. She's the exact opposite. She wants you to prejudge everyone based on their little, intersectional boxes and their victimization charts, and then have your interaction. How healthy you think that interaction is going to be? This is a dark, destructive grift that is being perpetrated willingly by a lot of companies, not only on their employees, but on the fabric of society. And she is one of the worst people I've seen in a long time. And there's a bunch like her out there who are selling the same nonsense. Other than that, I think the woman is great. She's terrific. So the professor and I got into this thing about Marxism, and he said I might be confused with a conspiracy theorist. But here I have a very short clip of one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter basically saying that they are trained Marxists.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
So therefore, it's not such a conspiracy. And to be fair, 2 days ago, I sent her an invitation to come on the podcast. And I was totally honest. I said, look, we may not agree on things, but I want to give you a fair hearing. I want to understand what your goals are, what you'd like to achieve, what your vision is for the future, and we can engage on those ideas. So if anyone knows her, her name is Patrice Cullors. Would love to have her on the show.